Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Contact Exec Podcast. I am your host, Robert Zimmerman, and I have Cameron Page with me today, the CEO, founder of ClearStory. Now, you're going to correct me if I'm wrong, but was it formerly X-Tracker, or has it always been ClearStory kind of from the day?
No, it was, we had a different name at one point. Yeah, we were X-Tracker. Originally, it was tracking extra work, and we thought it'd be really clever to combine the two names, but it was a confusing name. And probably about 3 years ago that we changed our name. So
yeah, I like the new name better.
In the past.
Yeah, I like the new name better. I like what it stands for. It has a bit of an architectural view on it, right? The window into the dark soul of the construction paperwork madness that is.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that was the part of the idea behind it. It's double meaning, right? A ClearStory is an architectural window, right? And if you look up the exact definition of a ClearStory, I think it's like a light pane designed to bring light into spaces that don't often get light, which really is like true of the change order process very often. There's a lot of things in a dark email folder or a filing cabinet that are forgotten. And the whole job of ClearStory is to surface that so there's transparency and visibility in real time. We actually thought about spelling it like the traditional way, CLERE story, but decided against that, which I think was the right intent. Well,
you were trying to get rid of the confusion, but I like that, the double entendre is still great. I love it. So you and I were just chatting before we, kind of got onto the podcast, and we've been in construction now quite a bit of time. We both kind of started from the same spot, we were, apprentices in the carpentry field, kind of worked our way up. You were a project manager for quite a bit of time at, what was it? Is it DevCon that you were working for? Okay. And so, there was an aha moment somewhere along there, right? There was man, this sucks and something's got to be done about it.
Yeah. There's a lot of aha moments for sure.
Anyone?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been.
Anyone in particular that's just like that's stuck with you for these years, and you're just like, okay, we've got it. This has got to stop.
Yeah. Well, the challenge is, I mean, as a project manager, your main focus is, time, quality, and cost. Schedule, quality, and cost, and you're trying to make sure that you understand where you're at in terms of cost, and as in real time as that is possible. And the challenge with change orders is that the nature of the tools for how we communicate and share change orders is not very real time. I mean, email is real time, but actually getting it into your financial software is a pretty manual process. And so my consistent challenge and pattern on my projects was I wanted to know what our true cost exposure was at any point in time. And that's really what is outstanding with all of our trade partners. So that I can compare that exposure to what we're actually forecasting internally. And that's what we now call the change order gap that I was dealing with, all those years. And the process, the industry goes through, whether it's owner to GC, GC to subcontractor, subcontractor to like sub-tier vendor, is really the best way to get alignment is to have a change order log, which is, a manually created document or an export. But the key thing is that it's static. And so on every project I was running, once a month or every other week, we'd be emailing our trade partners saying, hey, can you send us your latest change order log to make sure we're aligned on what you guys think is outstanding matches what we think is outstanding.
Right.
And with 30 subcontractors, that can be a project engineer's full-time job. It's just getting that alignment, making sure they have all the files, downloading them, saving them somewhere.
Right. Well, just making the phone calls alone, thinking of the time of it, because it's not something that you can send an email out and expect to get a response on immediately. That's a thing where, hey, by the way, there's going to be money in the way over here. We need to get these folks on the horn and get them squared away, because it's an urgent thing, right? You got to have it. I need this information.
Right. Yeah. And there's different, we kind of think of change order work streams like 3 different work streams. One is your forward pricing, like a design change, or a, owner wants to know the cost of a different tile specification or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
And you're basically doing, you're only going to one trade partner because you've already awarded the contracts, but you're basically doing a small rebid of some scope of the project. And to do that the right way, a lot of time and energy needs to go into making sure the right people have the design change, making sure you've gotten the cost impacts back. And then it's your job as a general contractor to make sure, one, to help your trade partners make sure they've included all the right scope, but also making sure you're getting fair and accurate pricing. And so there's a lot of work that goes in on behalf of the client as a general contractor to make sure that that one pricing exercise has a clear understanding of the cost, the schedule impact, and all that kind of stuff. The challenge, though, is that with how iterative projects are now, it's really easy for an architect to make a design change.
Yeah.
The trend I was seeing on my projects is we were getting a flood of continuous design changes, throughout the project. And obviously, we want to help our client, maximize the value of the building they're building, because they're going to have that asset forever. And during construction is when you want to make sure you get the best value out of that asset. And so it's hard to kind of say no and tell your client that you're not going to price this design change and help them explore it. So there's always a balance there. But the challenge is that because the frequency is higher now, the amount of work the trade partners, the general contractor, and even the client has to go through to just make those decisions adds a ton of overhead to the project. Furthermore, if you delay in any part of that process, it delays making a decision, which can have schedule impacts. It can have sequencing conflicts in the project. And then all of a sudden your schedule is out of whack and you've got this backlog of change order decisions to make. And then the next work stream can kind of come into play where you're trying to make up time in the schedule. So you're working overtime, or there's more cleanup to do in the job site because trades are working on top of each other. And that's where kind of the age-old time and material process of the change order side comes in, where you're doing ticket work. So you're saying, hey, we got to work overtime to catch up on the schedule, or hey, it's in the winter and it rain delays, so we got to again work overtime, or there's trade damage, or there's additional cleanup, or whatever it might be. You wind up stacking up a lot of T&M work, and that's also a very manual process. Most specialty contractors still do that on paper or a fillable PDF form. They have to get verification, then they have to go price it, then they have to package that into a PDF, then they have to email it over. And there's a huge delay in cycle time for that work stream. And oftentimes those two things correlate to each other. So like the slower you are at pricing all the design changes, making decisions up front, can lead to more of that type of work, really at any point in the project, but particularly at the end when you're scrambling to finish.
Correct.
And then the third work stream is just surprise change orders, right? Maybe you send a submittal response back to your subcontractor and they identify a change. They're going to email you and say, hey, here's the cost associated with this change. In good faith, didn't know you guys were aware, but this is going to cost money. Again, there's no place for the GC to like automatically capture that change. So they got to rely on their inbox to capture that change exposure, download the file somewhere, and then ultimately enter it into, a potential change order in their financial software. And so for me in real life, like this manifested really on every single job. Like this is a problem.
Yes.
Small jobs,
yes.
medium-sized jobs, really big jobs.
Yeah.
And the challenge too is like up front, every job had a fair amount of pre-construction, but you could never predict, change, right? You can never predict what you're going to uncover when you put that first shovel in the ground and start digging up the dirt, or
mostly
how much rain you're going to get that winter.
I always found it was more, for me, it was more, even the clients are unpredictable at that point, because you were talking about the client could, initiate some sort of change and want you to look at it. And a lot of times I always called it like kicking the tires a little bit, because you'd spend a lot of time just on feasibility of what they wanted to do. If you especially if it was kind of late in the program a little bit, it's like, well, can we even do that? And I'm going to spending time, trying to figure out if we can even do it. And then by the time I've got it all kind of worked out, and then they go, oh, well, maybe I don't want to do that.
Yeah, you just invested weeks of your time where you could have been focusing on project execution and other things. And I think for a lot of teams, that's just overhead, right? And it's like, well, hey, it's your job. You got to do it. One, it's really hard to like summarize and quantify that amount of work that your teams are doing. And it's really hard to predict. There could be a huge influx of these changes at some point in the project. And it's like, hey, well, that's 12-week period. Our team had to shift their focus to pricing all these design changes instead of, focusing on, schedule and quality and the other things, the other million things you have to do as a project manager. And a lot of it's not value added work. A lot of it's just like downloading emails and entering cost information and creating PDF packages. And that's where the time goes. And that's where the delays in decision making and communication come in.
Sorting through siloed information, especially at that point in time. Somebody may have this on a piece of paper somewhere. Somebody may have it on a spreadsheet somewhere. It's not all connected and communicated. So yeah, I get it. Or lost in the
even
inbox.
on a project that, even if you get lucky and there's a project that doesn't have a lot of changes, which not every job has the same volume. That's the whole point. It's hard to predict. So you don't want to overstaff every job, assuming this is going to be the ceiling of a project that has a lot of changes. Because again, it's just hard to predict. It's hard to know where your client's going to come from. Hard to know how good the architect is going to be and how much they've deferred to, shop drawings and the submittal process to like finish the design. And you can get a good builder will get a good assessment of that, but it's still just hard. So again, you want to staff the job as competitively as possible, and you don't want to have a bunch of dedicated cost engineers just to do that manual process. And so you can wind up, understaffed, having to bring in more staff to help out with the change order volume, which adds to your overhead, which can impact your fee. Or you don't bring in that additional staff, and then you just fall behind. And then those decisions get delayed and all that kind of stuff. But even on a small job where you're just have a handful of changes, it still is beneficial to work through that as fast as possible.
Yes.
Because it's a value add to your client. You're trying to help them. Sometimes your clients build buildings professionally and they've been in this forever.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you're building a project for a client, and this is the one building they're going to build, in their lifetime. And so they always have a different level of understanding. And again, the more clearly and quickly you can communicate that change, the better off you're going to be.
That is definitely true. It's funny you say that. It's, I don't know what the actual percentage is, but the large portion, I had a conversation about this with somebody just the other day, but a large portion of the companies that are out there may not be, the super large ones. You work with a lot of large contractors, but most of the contractors out there are, mid-market size. They're smaller contractors. And when you talk about staffing up or staffing down a job in order to make sure that everything's covered, most of them don't even have that opportunity. There is no such thing as staffing up a job. It's like, hey, you're the PM on this job, and these are your 3 superintendents or whatever. Guess what? It's just you. You're out there, 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. or 8 p.m. whatever it is. Like, make it happen. Yeah, make it happen. And make me a bicycle clown, as they would say.
Exactly.
So I talk quite a bit to kind of the mid-market, construction folks, because again, they see, they're kind of hamstrung a little bit in some of these areas where this is what we got, and this is how we have to do this, and so they need all the help that they can get with digital technology, taking some of this off of their plate. So all of the factors considered around how quickly you can get to a change order. So give me a little bit more insight. You designed ClearStory to basically automate. Now, does it connect? It connects the GC, everybody that's involved in the project. Is it just kind of one line of communication? Say, here's the list, and it's visible for everybody, and that's how that works?
Yeah. The short answer is it can be, but for a mid-market specialty contractor, they can use it independently across all their projects. And really it becomes their workflow and communication layer for how to send and transmit change orders to all their general contractors. Their general contractor can be part of the ClearStory network and have an account, and they can see the change orders that trade partner has sent to them.
Mm-hmm.
But if the GC has never heard of ClearStory, the specialty contractor can use ClearStory to send them change orders. They can track if the change order has been opened by the customer, but they can also, probably one of the most powerful features and really innovations that we have is simple concept of a cloud-based change order log. So instead of sending a PDF, to your client, hey, here's my list of change orders, you can generate a shareable link, send them that link, and you say, hey, here's my first change order. And by the way, here's a link to my change order log. Whenever I send you a new change, this link is going to be automatically updated. all the docs live here, all the statuses live here. So if you ever want to see where we're at with change orders, just click this link. And so it gives the specialty contractor a way to really be transparent and upfront with their customers. But then it also on the flip side, kind of helps them drive accountability, because a lot of times the GC will say, well, hey, I never saw that. And now the sub can say, well, you did, because it's been in this link since the beginning of the project. And usually that's like a big pro, and it's a good opportunity for them to showcase how they use technology to add value for their clients. And, taking a step back to like the reason why we built the tool the way we did was, having lived on the GC side for 9 years, and, I got a bird's eye view into how each of my trade partners did change orders. And the high level thing is that every single one of them had a different process.
Yeah. Yeah.
All of them had financial software where they'd probably track their changes internally. But for the most part, when it came to tracking T&M work, that was probably the majority of it done on triplicate carbon copy paper, or maybe a fillable PDF form. Change order templates were primarily done in Excel or a Word doc, or sometimes they would create it in like an estimating tool and then PDF that. And then almost every change order log was either an export from a financial software or an Excel spreadsheet that the sub was keeping up to date on the side. But whatever that combination was almost universally different. The cover sheets all looked different. The way they structured change orders were always different. And so the challenge of that with the GC is that if I have a project engineer reviewing change orders, they have a big learning curve to understand how to digest the cost information.
Yeah, where's all the information at, and what is it? What's the detail in it? Because if it looks different on everything, it's like, well, what does this mean? Are they using some sort of abbreviation in this name? Is what because everybody, common language, right? We're talking about data governance almost, because of the way that things get stated, or where it is on the page, or how things get lost, especially if you've got a very, very long change, where you get 6, 7, 8 pages worth of stuff, and you're like trying to sort through it all.
Yeah. And, taking a step back further, for a general contractor, obviously we have 10, 20, 30, 40 trade partners on a job, just depending on the size and scope of the project. And for us, change orders represent cost. So they are a cost for us. For our trade partners, they represent budget and revenue, right? Because it's updating their contract so they can cover their costs associated with the change. And so for a subcontractor, it can be much more materially important. If they have a $100,000 contract, a $5,000 change is 5% of their project. And if they have a 15 or 20% fee on that, that's a quarter or a third of their fee, just that one little change.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas on the flip side of the equation, for the general contractor, a $5,000 cost on a $20 million project, it's not that big of an impact to them. And typically, they're not going to make any fee on that change order, because they're most often going to pay for it from contingency or an allowance that they have baked into the project. So for the GC, it might be small and it only represents risk, and they want to package it and pass it on to their client. But for the subcontractor, if you get 10 of those $5,000 change orders, then you're talking about like half of your job costs on that project. And so any mismanagement of that can quickly flip your project upside down.
Yeah, there's really not much. There's really not much that a subcontractor can truly eat. They don't. There's not. They have to bid them pretty thin, just to get the job in the first place. So they're all, pretty tight. As far as I can tell, most of them are pretty tight on their bid. They know what they can afford to build.
Yeah. And the big secret is that from a general contractor's point of view, almost always we can do one of two things. Almost always we can cover the cost of a change order, as long as it's fair and valid, because we have those allowances and contingencies built into the job cost. But when change orders get sent to us late or way after the fact, or hard to understand or hard to digest, that's when we have to go through a lot of back and forth to understand them. And as time passes on, we are drawing down those allowances and contingencies and trying to forecast to our client how much of that money is going to be spent. And if that process waits too long, we might have already closed out those allowances or contingencies. And that's when it gets very painful to go back to the client and ask for more money because you had the money.
Yeah, it was
And
sticky. Yeah.
yeah, so the big message that I always preach to subcontractors is like, if you want to get paid for the change orders, the best thing you can do is reduce your cycle time for processing and sending the associated cost and make it as clear as possible. Because the other thing we can do as a general contractor is if let's say there's like a bunch of, trade damage work that's piling up or back charge work that's piling up or, ongoing overtime. If we're seeing that cost in real time and understanding how much we're accruing and we can forecast what we think it's going to be, we can actually help align on a course correction and be like, oh, wow, based on how many change orders you've sent in the first 2 weeks of this work, we got to pause. We got to do something different. We got to pull in the client and get alignment here. But what so often happens is that 10 weeks go by and you get a bill for $60,000 and you say, hold on, I had no idea it was going to cost this much. And then the sub says, well, we've been behind on our paperwork and we've been trying to process this stuff, but you also want us to focus on execution. And that's where those are like kind of the two root causes of subcontractors having to then negotiate with GCs and not get paid in full. So again, it's like the big thing I preach to subcontractors, if you can focus your process around speed of pricing and getting that to your client, you're going to do yourself a lot of favors and you're going to make your GC's life infinitely easier and you're going to get probably paid a lot.
Yeah, I always thought about that too. If I'm a subcontractor, I think I would want to focus on the speed of how quickly I can turn around that information, because obviously an approved change order, something you want to get started on, because that's automatically, you can start putting that money, especially if it's something that you can start immediately. You can start, maybe pulling draws on that, especially if it's a fairly big. I had a contractor client, fairly large electrical contractor client. They would be like, well, it takes us, a little bit of time to get some of this stuff in the system. And it's a $10 million change order around the super large projects. And I'm like, we want to get to that, we want to get to that money. We got to get to that job. So the faster they can turn that stuff around, the faster they want to get into it, because, like to your point, depending on the size of the contract, it's another quarter, worth in their of their margins, another quarter. It's like almost doubling their money sometimes.
Yeah. And it's all relative, right? It's just relative to the size of the job. And so like on that $10 million change, that might be a $3 billion data center. And the project engineer who's looking at that $10 million change might be like, well, in the grand scheme of things, like this is just one of many $10 million changes we got to go through.
Right.
But obviously that's real money for the subcontractor.
Yeah. Yeah.
And,
well,
and again, cash on it too.
Their cash flow is everything, right? Their cash flow is everything. If they're not keeping their cash flow out in front of it, because again, I feel for the guys out there that end up holding the bag on the back end of these deals, because they've already paid for the labor, especially when it's all done. There's always the big 10% retainage fight. There's always that kind of thing. It's like, hey, we've done the work. You asked us to do all these things. We tried to do everything right. We got to get to the last of this. We got to get our dollars in, because they need to move past it, get on to the next job.
Yeah. And again, the big challenge is, going back to those 3 work streams, like focusing on the first two work streams. The first is like a forward price change where they're going to price the work, ideally get approval, ideally proceed on it. However, there's often things in the contract where they're like required to proceed on work, even while the pricing is being negotiated, which that obviously puts a ton of strain on the subcontractor, because it's like at a certain point, how much of that can you actually proceed on before you can get it approved so you can go bill for it. So there's always like a bit of a balance there. And again, speed is the number one way to solve a lot of that, because the faster you can get it, like if you can't get your documents together to send to them before you need to start the work, that's a problem. Then on the flip side, it's even more painful when it comes to T&M work, because again, a lot of times the contract will stipulate the GC can direct time and materials work. And that just based on how it works, you are literally spending labor, material, equipment to execute that work on a T&M basis. So you are quite literally spending money to do that work. And then the burden goes completely back onto you to make sure you track it in the field. You can sign off by the GC. You have to get that doc back to the office. You have to manually price it. Then you have to email it to them and wait for them to respond. And you have no leverage.
You're literally funding that function for a period of time, whatever that period of time is. You're funding. You are the bank at that point.
Yeah, and that's where it gets really hairy. If you are slow in that process, you proceed in a lot of that work. And then just simple things like they can't read the T&M ticket, right? It's written on paper. It's got coffee stains on it. You're shooting yourself in the foot at that point, because again, I go back to that secret of like, if you can get the cost to your GC quickly, they can either get it paid for because they probably have an allowance or a contingency, or they can pause the work and course correct.
Now I see on your
list,
those
two options go away the longer it takes.
I see on some of the folks that so you get Turner. It looks like, is Turner one of your clients? Suffolk, Clayco, groups like that. So these are big GCs. Are the GCs finding it's best to have this so that they can then distribute it to these subs, so that it makes the life easier for everybody?
Yeah, that's the goal, and kind of the beauty of it is both parties can use it. So we do work with a lot of the big E&R top general contractors, which is awesome for us. And what's really cool is that it gets exposure to a lot of the subcontractors, but probably about 75 to 80% of our customers are large, mid-market, and true SMB specialty contractors. So we really built a tool that can work for all trades and really companies of all size.
But the GCs
our number one trade
value.
vertical. Yeah. So the way a GC uses it, they're going to say, hey, we're using ClearStory on this job. For a change order request to be valid, you've got to upload it into ClearStory. It's really as simple as that. The sub can either drag and drop their change order, and it's really that basic, or we have templates and workflows in our software where they can actually create their change order request cover sheets, which again kind of help a good standardization of how to break down that information. And then the other part of our software is the GC can use us to like authorize T&M work. So a ticket gets shared between both parties. The trade partner can fill out that ticket digitally. And what's really cool is if they have their rates uploaded in their account, when that ticket gets created, they can click a button in our software and it automatically prices it as a change order request. So we preach to our customers, if you're doing T&M on Friday, at the latest Monday morning, you should have that pricing to the GC. That's kind of surprisingly, we're really the only tool on the market that has that true end-to-end workflow. But it's really powerful for subcontractors and kind of eliminates, one of those pain points around having your process for pricing and tracking being the bottleneck, and it flips it back into kind of the GC's court. It's like, hey, we've gotten you the information. It's clear. It's all here. Where are we at?
It's interesting. So all this just kind of started out of your days of being kind of just frustrated with how this process works. Everybody needs to be on board. What's new? I mean, I know you say you got quite a few stories, but what? And I don't want to put you on the spot too much, but what are some areas where it's just like, hey, that's not working very well. We need to make an adjustment here. I mean, obviously you ran into these things when you're in the field of what didn't work very well, but what about the software did you run into that said, oh man, because when I talk to people today, one of the biggest things is they say, well, the tech doesn't solve all my problems, right? And I say, well, sometimes the tech is a tool, right? And you have to utilize the tool properly in order to make it work, meaning you have to have the processes in place with your people. And sometimes you got to change those processes. And from a founder's side, what did you find early on? It was like you came at it at an approach and then you said, no, we need to change this up a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, constant change and iteration. And that's the beauty of software is like, it's easier to change that than like once you've completed a building. But software is challenging in and of itself. I came from the GC world. I'd managed large scale complex projects. And I said to myself, hey, how hard could it be to manage, a group of developers? And, I can build buildings. Why can't I build software?
Yeah, right. It's
And
the same thing, right?
turned out there were some principles that were similar of project management, but, it was kind of a whole new world. Yeah, I think some of the, early lessons is, with software, you always build a minimum viable product first. The beauty of my background is I had tons of friends in the industry, both from my construction management days at Cal Poly through my 9 years at DevCon. I had built a pretty sizable network of friends in the industry, and so I did work on this nights and weekends off to the side, and got it basically ready to a point where I could launch. I spent quite a bit of my own money, and my wife was wondering when I was going to stop spending money and launch this thing, and so we finally launched. And there's like this, kind of famous saying in software, I'll paraphrase, is like, if your product's perfect when you launch, you launch too late, type of thing. And so
Yeah.
we definitely didn't launch too late because the product wasn't perfect. But one of the big learnings was, early on we would sell it to, heavy civil contractors or general contractors, and they'd say, well, hey, I want to use it upstream and downstream. And the way we initially built it was, you kind of had to pick. I'm either a GC or I'm a subcontractor. And then there's different workflows in both of those two kind of portals, if you will. And so we made this tough decision in 2019 that we were going to rebuild the whole platform from the ground up and really make it a true business network where anybody could send change order requests to their customer or receive them downstream from their client, or downstream contractor. And so what's been really cool is now we have projects where the owner's using ClearStory, the GC's using ClearStory, all the subcontractors are using ClearStory, and then some of those sub-tier vendors are also using ClearStory. And so we can kind of help the whole project team pass cost information up and down the supply chain, like much faster than you can with, traditional methods.
Traditional. That's fantastic. And that's one of the things everybody always talks about. When I first got into the tech side of the construction world, everybody always said, well, it's the communication is broken between the field and the office. And tech took that to mean the data. And I think that's true for the most part. It's like, yes, that's correct. The data is not the same between, they may not be talking the same language, right? And so maybe the data is a little different. And so when you finally run into that, you finally realize you kind of got to get everybody into the same room, much like you'd have a pre-con meeting, before you got kicked off, but to get everybody in the same room or get everybody on the same page so that they understand, like, these are the tools that we're going to be using. This is how we're going to use them. And everybody needs to communicate through these tools, right? And as before, it was like everything gets stuck into an email over here, gets that over here. But now this idea of getting everybody on the same page seems to be so smart, and it seems just completely reasonable. But yet for years, it's like there was some secret, that we had to keep for some reason. And I never did understand that, because that was it was totally confusing to me. So I'm glad to hear that, finally, maybe we're coming around to some common sense when it's like, hey, get everybody on the same page with the same application so that I was one of the early adopters of Procore, I'm going to be honest, like way back when. And I had brought it to the small GC that I was working for. And but my problem with it is that I couldn't get my subs on it, and I couldn't get, so it worked great for me. I could see everything that was going on, but it was like, hey, I need to give you access to this. But then I couldn't give them access for some reason. It was just like, this doesn't make any sense to have this whole platform that has all the information in it that everybody needs, and then I can't get to it, or they can't get to it. It just seems strange to me.
Yeah. No, it's interesting because, well, first of all, field to office communication, in construction, we treat this as this like white whale of the problem we're always trying to solve. And the reality is, like, communication in business is challenging in any company. In a software company, we struggle with internal communication, and we don't have a field. Like, we have, our product and engineering team, we're always working on ways to like prove both written and verbal communication between product and engineering and go to market. And so, I think sometimes we got to give like our industry some slack of like some of the challenges we're dealing with are universal. But I definitely agree that really good workflow tools are a way to solve that communication. And really the communication we're trying to solve is both internal, tracking T&M work in the field, making sure that's instantly logged back in the office. That's one way of improving the internal field to office communication. But the problem we're really focused on is like company to company communication. When it comes to like, particularly, I think some of the project management tools out there, like the Procores and Autodesks, have, better workflows for improving like project management workflows when it comes to like drawings and RFIs and submittals. I still think our industry has a long ways to go there. But when it comes to like financial communication and workflows, there's really not a lot. And that's because for a reason, right? When you buy a financial software tool, whether it's your ERP or a project level financial solution, like you want to keep that information private.
Yeah.
Because where you're tracking your cost, your fee, your profit.
Right. You get the keys to the kingdom in there. Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly.
You get the
but change orders are
but
change orders are one of those things you have to share. Like you have to get alignment. You have to close out the job at some point. And so that's why we're kind of we're like a net new thing for the industry. And so we've had to kind of educate and explain to people why you need a tool like ClearStory. But it's also one of those solutions where, we get a lot of those comments of like, oh, of course this exists. Oh, this is so obvious. Like, how come this hasn't existed before? Which is like fun for me to hear. And it's like, we get a lot of like, I can't believe no one ever built this. And I'm like, yeah, I can't either. I can't believe I was the first one to come up with it, but here we are. So.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, it seems so common sense, right? But yet maybe it's just that there wasn't somebody brave enough to take on the, I don't know if you're brave or if you're crazy, but I'm just saying it takes somebody like that, right? You have to have a little bit of that inside to go, yeah, I'm going to take this thing on. Because I think that's huge, right? Like, I don't know. I consider this new age of construction, especially as we move into it, we're combining technology with, blue collar, boots in the dirt, work. And it's difficult because, technology runs on rules. Computers only do what they're told to do, right? It's all about construction and rules, and they're not intuitive like a lot of construction, operations are. Just a computer can't walk onto a job right now and look at a job site like a good superintendent can and go, I'm going to tell you right now, you're going to have a problem with this, this, and this. Can't do that. It doesn't have kind of that foresight or have seen it before. It can only give you, I think at this point, kind of what it's been given. It can help you calculate really well. Some great encyclopedia of kind of things. And I say as we move into the age of AI, we definitely need people that know how to work with it. And I don't care if you're in the blue collar area or if you're in the project management area. We've got to figure out a way to work with it because it's coming and nobody's stopping it, right? At this point.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there's a couple of things that are, going to help drive adoption. And I think, I was having a conversation with one of the big tech companies in the space just the other night. And, they said really since COVID, they've seen a huge uptick in technology adoption just across their, portfolio of software that they sell. And, part of that's because during the pandemic, we were all forced to download Zoom and learn how to use Zoom. And, simple things like that have accelerated, people just being more comfortable using technology. It's also made companies like ours a little bit easier to actually sell technology because now we can, like in the early days, we would lose customers because they couldn't install Zoom. We couldn't give them a demo. And we were too small to go fly out to their office. And so, just little things like that, I think have helped accelerate. But the other thing that I think's, I always get frustrated when I hear about, the lag of technology adoption in our industry, because I think if you're actually in the industry, there's a lot of technology that these companies are using that's pretty incredibly sophisticated when it comes to 3D modeling tools, job site laser scanners, the equipment that gets used on these jobs. There's a ton of innovation, they're all over the place. It's not always just like SaaS innovation. So,
right.
I always want to like give our industry credit. And then I would say two things. Like one, there is certainly a younger generation, kind of like my generation and below, who have just grown up with technology and software. And, we had the internet in middle school.
Hmm.
Those people are now coming into leadership roles in a lot of these companies. And so I think as that passing of the guard continues to happen, we'll continue to see an influx in technology adoption. But even the elder statesmen of our industry, I think the
Hey,
thing that people miss is that they're all smart people. I mean, if you're
yeah,
running a subcontractor for a long time, or a general contractor, or a leadership position, you kind of need to be a pretty smart and sophisticated person. I think more than people give credit for. And those people can figure things out as long as the software is intuitive and easy to use and holds up their kind of end of the bargain.
yeah. I held a little meeting. I was yesterday with the client, and I had to give the speech to the group of, even the graybeards like myself. We've got to stay open-minded here. This is not 1992. This is not AI is coming for everyone, and it's not. I don't know if it's good or bad thing at this point. It doesn't really matter, but we have to adjust because at the speed that maybe we need some of these products, we've got to adjust to be able to provide it. Because when I looked around the room, we got builders and project managers and those kinds of things. That's like, you guys are the ones that have to do the work, and it's at the end of the day, there are going to be demands on you that maybe if you embrace pieces and parts of this technology, it takes something off of your plate, and it actually provides you something that truly advances how productive you are in your day, and then also advances how productive other people are. Because I think a lot of times, and my whole breakdown of it was because a lot of times what happens is, I know that you're really good at your job, but a lot of times what can make somebody else good at their job as well, and technology can help us transfer that information. It's what it's kind of what ClearStory does. It's like some superintendent or project manager knows there's a change here is happening, but he's got to let everybody else know so they can be better at their job. So it gets, that speed, it makes that thing happen. And that's what construction is becoming. Not because we have to be super fast, but the demand is there, for us to figure out a way to be a little bit more productive. So I think that's interesting how that all kind of shakes out.
I think the job of a good software provider is to help drive best practice and good workflow.
Mm-hmm.
Um, our approach to it, having been in the industry so long, I knew that we shouldn't reinvent the wheel. We should just optimize every step of the process. And so the way we built ClearStory was, what we believed change order best practices and workflow are. And we built that, having been in the industry, you just see everyone's change order process and you generally know what's good and bad, but also the key checkpoints, right? Like a T&M ticket out in the field shouldn't have pricing on it because you don't want the field crews agreeing on price out in the field, but you need that documented, verified. The change order request, needs pricing on it and it needs that tag attached to it. So instead of like reinventing the process and having it automatically priced in the field, which we could have done, we stuck with the process so people can wrap their heads around the workflow of the tool. It's familiar to them, but then we automated the heck out of it to make it almost feel like it was instantly priced, but we still respect the traditional process in the industry. And we did have some competitors early on who tried to bypass that step and tried to make it so, hey, the tag actually now has pricing. Isn't that great? And it's like, that's not the way our industry works. And we can't force software on them to try and change. And that's just one example, right? But you can't force software on people to try and reinvent the wheel and change their core workflows and processes, because it won't scale. Like if you're a sub and you're using a tool that does that, if half your GCs don't want their superintendents signing off on costs in the field, the tool's not going to
That's
scale.
right.
And so
Yeah.
that's where it's the job of the software provider to have a good point of view and build it in a way that they can adopt it easily and scale with it.
Well, I'm finding folks that are actually from the construction industry, they have a bit of foresight into this and can, I'll say, talk contractor, you know what I mean? Have a bit more success when it comes down to it, because they are able to go, get the feels of, hey, by the way, that's probably not going to fly, even though it seems like a great little, bell and whistle in this, in your tech mind over here, but in the construction mind, that doesn't fly because this is the behavior or the culture, right? You don't do that, And then I think that's interesting too, because we still have that out in front of us, which is the cultures are still quite different, and it takes a lot to get a tech mind and a construction mind to kind of to meld together a little bit to get a great product going. And as I said, the construction mind needs to probably, get a little bit more, stay a little more open-minded, I would say. And the tech nine needs to maybe listen a little bit and go, hey, we're not, these are construction people. And as much as I would say that, I think we are a bit of a snowflake as compared to some other industries. You know what I mean? We've got our own little crazy to it. I don't know what it is, but there's something about it. But I love it, and I know you do too. We've been in a long time, and so we keep at it. 45 minutes or so flies pretty fast. But before we go, Cameron, I want to know where do people find ClearStory? What's the best way to get a hold of your representation or representatives or yourself? How do we do that?
Yeah. No, yeah. If anyone's interested, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn or connect with me there. That's my main social channel. Or just go to our website. We got a bunch of customer testimonial videos, demo videos. You can do a lot of self-exploration if you want to educate yourself on what ClearStory is all about. Or, our team's standing by. One of the things I always felt strongly about was hiring people from the industry to sell our product, but also train and onboard our products. Our customer success team that's there to help companies roll out our software is 100% people from the industry. And our sales team is also, majority of people from the industry. The few that are not have been indoctrinated by their team members. And so
that's trial by fire,
I
man.
feel, yeah, exactly. I feel pretty strongly that, if you're going to sell a product, you need to help guide your potential client and make them feel comfortable. And so I think we've got a good team to do that. So if you do want to get a hands-on demo, our team's ready to roll, and whenever you guys are.
That's fantastic. Well, thanks for spending a little time with me today, Cameron. I'm glad we got to finally do this. I know it took a few schedules, but we made it happen. I do appreciate it. And I would like to have you come back on sometime, maybe later this year, and we'll see how things are going to ClearStory. We'll swap some more tall tales.
That sounds great. Yeah, enjoyed it.
All right, man. Thanks so much, everybody out there. Thanks for joining us on the Contact Exec. Stay tuned. We've got a lot of cool stuff coming up in the next few weeks. I've got quite a few in the hopper, so it's going to be interesting to see what we roll out. It'll be a surprise as it is every week, but thank you, and everybody stay safe out there on those job sites.